Hello, my name is Sunana Abdul, and I am a research scholar at the Department of Architecture and Planning at the National Institute of Technology, Calicut, in Kerala, India. My presentation titled A Methodology to Plan for Stakeholder Involvement in Heritage Sensitive Urban Areas discusses a portion of my research work that tries to develop a framework through community involvement by addressing the community's needs and in the process develop plans for conservation areas. Urban heritage conservation aims to prioritize architectural heritage and ensure continuity through the fulfillment of the developmental needs of the people. Historic buildings should not be looked at as single entities but be planned along with the city's growth. Conservation and development are conflicting disciplines that need to be addressed in thriving historic settlements and towns. Developing countries are more prone to destroying heritage assets through long standing debates between promoting growth or culture. Developing countries such as China and India are faced with the predicament of choosing development over conservation. Urban conservation within a developing context involves various issues. India has a rich cultural heritage spanning more than 1,000 years. Booming historical centers and settlements in India have countless heritage structures that are neglected and dilapidated. Though historic buildings exist, many are demolished, paving the way for development. Iconic buildings are not the only determinants of a city's culture. Various regeneration schemes, such as Hriday, are implemented in historic centers and towns in India by planning and developing heritage sensitive infrastructure through revitalization and regeneration schemes. One of the major limitations of the existing international doctrines on conservation tend to be mainly focused on architecture. Revitalization and rehabilitation schemes that focus on developing historic urban areas using a market approach or physically improving an existing structure are mainly sought after options in promoting conservation. In the context of urban conservation, heritage resource management entails identifying, conserving, and caring for historic properties in the public interest. A common framework for defining heritage management systems by UNESCO consists of three main elements: the legal framework, institutional framework, and the executive framework. The legal framework acts as a mandate that empowers people and organizations to act. It tends to define, identify, protect, and conserve built heritage through a combination of legislation at various levels. The institutional framework is empowered by these legislations. Organizations formed as part of legislations are instrumental in planning and implementing actions required for reviewing and improving work methods. The executive framework consists of resources needed to execute the framework. Managing heritage sites is a complex phenomenon involving a variety of resources. These include planning tools and techniques, financial mechanisms, and human resources broken down into three main levels, that is, within the institutional framework, among practitioners, and communities and networks. Heritage management is recommended to be carried out through a people centered management approach. Stakeholders are people who have an interest in the program or are affected by it. Establishing a self supporting social and economic system for stakeholders can help generate a sustainable solution in heritage management. The former Director General of UNESCO had mentioned, without the understanding and support of the public and daily care of local communities and residents, no amount of funds or experts would help protect these sites. The present research is actually an attempt to incorporate a systematic process of involving stakeholders so as to ensure long term sustainability for urban heritage conservation projects. The urban conservation performance of an area can be delineated under six major aspects, being the physical aspect, social, economic, cultural, political, and continuity aspect. The physical aspect is evaluating the conservation of the historic built form and the tangible urban fabric surrounding it. The social aspect is aimed to assess the social impact of implementing the conservation project. The economic aspect emphasized the user's benefit and the development's economic impacts. The cultural aspect is associated with retention of intangible heritage. The political aspect is also used for assessing the processes associated at various levels with respect to an urban heritage conservation project, and the continuity aspect refers to the dimensions that lead to sustainable conservation. The urban conservation performance of an area in a study conducted by Chen in 2017 had found several factors under various aspects that were used to assess the urban conservation performance of the area. Several other factors from a literature review were added on to this list of various factors and taken over for the research work. The methodology to plan for stakeholder involvement in heritage sensitive urban areas consisted of a four-stage process. The first stage included weighting aspects and identifying the influential factors that determined the urban conservation performance of an area. The second stage involved formulating a method for the inclusion of stakeholders. The third stage involved developing a conservation project performance assessment model. And the fourth stage was to develop the proposed framework. Stage 1: weighting aspects and identifying influential factors determining the performance of an urban conservation project. So this consisted of 5 steps. The first step included identifying experts practicing the field of heritage conservation. The second step consisted of using average weighted ranking to identify the hierarchy of factors among the respondents. Spearman correlation was done to identify factors that were positively and negatively correlated. The positively correlated factors were minimized with the highest correlated factor taken into consideration. Finally, the aspect weightage was done using analytic hierarchy process. And from the study it was found that the the aspects that were given the highest weightage were the cultural and the continuity aspect as opposed to the physical or social aspects. Stage 2: formulating a method for the inclusion of stakeholders. So this consisted of 4 major steps. The first step was developing the actor network diagram for an urban heritage conservation project. The second included identification of stakeholders using and social network analysis tools. The third step included assessing stakeholder benefits and their concerns in an urban heritage conservation project. And finally, the assessment framework for the inclusion of stakeholders was developed. The first step of formulating a framework for the inclusion of stakeholders included developing the actor network diagram for an urban heritage conservation project. The focal components of ANT was first to delineate who are the actors of the network, which included human as well as non-human actors. The human actors could be humans as well as organizations, whereas the non-human actors were considered to be values or text documents or artifacts. The next stage of the actor network theory is to translate the existing actors into actor network diagrams. So this was done using 4 major steps, that is the problematization phase, the interassessment phase, the enrollment phase, and the mobilization phase. From here, the problematization phase defined who were the focal actors that were there in the network, identifying the identities and interests of the other actors, developing who are the mediators, and establishing which are the obligatory passage points of the network. From the study, it was found that there were 45 actors that were considered as actors that were part of an urban heritage conservation project, which included 9 human actors and 12 value non-human actors, 13 texts, 6 artifacts, which could be spatial and technological developments, and organizations were 4 in number. The number of nodes were considered to be 370, and the strength between various nodes were determined through the flow of design or planning information on the final outcome, which were given strengths of 1, 2, 3, and 4. From amongst the actors that were developed as part of the actor network diagram, the human actors were taken into consideration for developing the social network analysis of the actors available, and it was found that the community and its residents were considered to be critical stakeholders in an urban heritage conservation project. Hence, these actors or these stakeholders were taken further as part of the inclusion process of stakeholder involvement. The next stage was to assess stakeholder benefits and concerns of these community and residents, and from there we found that the stakeholder concerns with respect to following conservation practices available were listed out, that is preservation orders, land use zoning, imposition of process requirements, restrictions on property alterations, requirements for maintenance of property, prohibition of demolition were all factors or concerns that were influencing the need to conserve in an urban heritage conservation project amongst the stakeholders. The benefits of an urban heritage conservation project were delineated into macroeconomic variables and the non-market benefits that people associate with heritage sites. The macroeconomic variables included economic benefits, whereas the non-market benefits were associated with the cultural benefit as well as social benefit that stakeholders attributed to living within a heritage site. The study area chosen for the research is located within Kerala in the southernmost district, that is Thiruvananthapuram. The Thiruvananthapuram Fort area had received the PATA award in 2003 for its revitalization and conservation efforts. The shift of the capital from Padmanabhapuram to Thiruvananthapuram in 1750 had led to the development of a new town. Once a temple town centered on the Padmanabhaswamy temple, it housed palace complexes, agraharams and Ammavidagal. By the 19th century, development had increased within the fort complex and further led to development outside the fort areas with high-rise buildings and transport depots. The building fabric comprises of residential buildings, commercial buildings, religious and semi-public and private buildings. Currently, there is a lack of open spaces in the fort area, which is further magnified by commercial development caused due to the proximity of transport terminals. This study was taken since, as development is continuously shaping the area, the ground level stakeholders are studied to get an insight into their livelihood satisfaction within the fort area. The assessment framework for the inclusion of stakeholders was done using a fuzzy evaluation matrix. This identified weighting the different stakeholder groups from the experts, which was considered to be known as the first class index, and the weighting of the various benefits of various stakeholders were considered to be second class index. The various benefits were again mean scored, and the satisfaction level of the stakeholders were based on Likert scale data. And based on a cutoff value of 3.5 among 1 to 5, the stakeholders were delineated or categorized into positive and negative stakeholders. Amongst the positive stakeholders, these were further included in the process for assessing the conservation project performance of the model, whereas the negative stakeholders that had low satisfaction, their concerns were identified and the benefits of these stakeholders were incorporated in the planning framework to further enhance involvement of the negative stakeholders in the conservation process. Using the mean score ranking technique for evaluating stakeholder concerns and used as part of the stakeholder benefit analysis, it was found from amongst the 322 samples amongst the stakeholder concerns, the requirement for maintenance of property was considered to be one of the major concerns amongst the stakeholders, that is the ground level stakeholders, which involved the residents as well as non-residents living within the fort area. The second concern was the restriction on property alterations, whereas the third was the imposition of process requirements in achieving conservation objectives amongst the stakeholders. In the stakeholder benefit analysis, it can be seen that the factors that are associated with influencing the satisfaction of the various stakeholder groups were seen to increase by concentrating on those benefits that is the social benefits as well as the cultural benefits amongst the stakeholder groups were seen to influence the satisfaction of the stakeholder groups. The economic benefit was not seen to be of much influence amongst the stakeholder group study that was done. The regression model developed with statistically significant variables followed all the assumptions of the regression, and it was found that the dependent variable, that is stakeholder satisfaction, was influenced by majorly 7 factors, influential factors, which included the preservation of form and built fabric, that was the physical aspect, followed by the spatial transformation of built form, which included the adaptive reuse potential of such sites, the buffer zone treatment, and following the economic aspect, the economic needs of the stakeholders needed to be considered in order to influence their satisfaction. Amongst the political aspect, the management of heritage sites, being involved in such heritage sites needed to be an important aspect. Then the economic sustainability and the environmental continuity were aspects within the continuity aspect that needed to be given due attention. So amongst the ordinal logistic regression results, it was found that as part of the experts' analysis, the continuity and the cultural aspect were given due importance, whereas from the regression model, it was found that the physical aspect and the continuity aspect was given higher importance, followed by the political as well as followed by the political aspect. The final stage, that is the proposed framework, involved amalgamating the results from the first 3 stages. That is the first stage, which included expert weighting of the influential factors. This was done to give an idea on what are the factors that need to be considered for determining the urban conservation performance of a project from the viewpoint of the experts, and this identified influential factors were taken over for the stakeholder analysis. The second stage was identifying the stakeholder groups and to involve or for their inclusion. So the critical stakeholder identification was done using the actor network theory and social network analysis, and the stakeholder survey for stakeholder benefit analysis was also done. So as part of the actor network theory, we identified the focal actors and their mediators in an urban heritage conservation project, and As part of the stakeholder benefit survey, we have identified who are the critical stakeholders that can be considered to be positive as well as negative stakeholder groups within an urban heritage conservation project. The third stage, that is evaluating these influential factors as part of the regression model. The stakeholder survey was done to identify the influential factors that determine stakeholder satisfaction. The influential factors identified from the expert survey were evaluated by the stakeholders to determine what were the factors that influenced the stakeholders' perception of satisfaction in an urban heritage conservation project. The urban heritage conservation framework in the Indian scenario can be delineated as the legal, institutional, executive framework. As part of the legal framework, we have at the national level, the state level, and the local level. The Amritsar Act at the national level, the list 2 of 7th schedule. At the state level, the local level has the 12th schedule, where urban local bodies have to promote cultural, educational, and aesthetic aspects. As part of the legal frameworks, development of the institutional bodies, as part of the Amritsar Act, we have the ASI, the Archaeological Survey of India. Then, as part of the Amendment Act of Amritsar, we have the National Monuments Authority and INTAC that supports and provides guidelines. At the state level, we have the State Department of Archaeology, and as part of state laws at the state level, we have various town and country planning organizations, CPWDs, etc. And at the local level, we have the Constitution of Heritage Conservation Committees for conservation zones in various states. And as part of the executive framework, we have the planning processes, the tools and techniques that are involved, the financial mechanisms, and the human resources. So as part of the planning process that are legally binding, we have the master plan, development of local area plans, heritage zones, special area zones, and the various tools and techniques involved including development management techniques, land use regulations, property acquisitions, building codes and standards. And the financial mechanism is dependent on internationally. It depends on the Getty Foundation, the World Bank, the World Heritage Fund, whereas nationally it has a National Cultural Fund. And coming to the human resources, which is the major part of the study, stakeholders can be involved as public and private institutions. And there's a third category to it, that is the user group. So the stakeholders that are generally not involved includes businesses, entrepreneurs, individuals, local communities within a geographical area, real estate development enterprises, tourists, etc. that have a varied interest, which includes social responsibilities, the need for better facilities, the need for stakeholder profitability, etc. The outcome, one of the outcomes from the study is dependent on the executive framework, where involving the human resources, that is the stakeholders, that is the user group, the ones that are not involved as part of the study, local communities within a geographical area. The analysis that have been derived from this 3-stage process feeds back into the planning process at the master plan level. Since the master plan is a legal document, it can be designed in such a way that the stakeholders' interests in being part of protecting their heritage are involved in the process of decision making. By including their benefits, by maximizing their benefits, the process of stakeholder inclusion can be better informed. So as part of the planning process and developing a master plan, the planners in an urban heritage area, the planners involved in the development of the master plans in an urban heritage area, there is a need for identifying the heritage assets through listing significant buildings of value. And a stakeholder benefit analysis and an active network theory study needs to be conducted to identify whether the various stakeholder categories fall within the satisfied or not satisfied category, identifying the benefits of these stakeholders and improving ways to maximize their benefits. At the urban designers level, the urban designers need to take the stakeholders' concerns into the account, that is with respect to providing the various standards, the building codes or standards, is they need to take into account stakeholder concerns in order to reduce the concerns that people face. And as part of the conservation architect's role, need to identify significant buildings of value, and identifying the influential factors can help determine the urban conservation performance of a historic urban area. By focusing on the factors that are influential to stakeholders based on recognition results, can further amplify how there is a divide between the expectation and reality of the stakeholders present on ground. So all these can help feedback into the system and to further influence how the top-down approach of planning is not influencing how the stakeholders on the ground perceive it. The stakeholders in urban conservation projects are associated primarily with the public and private sectors and rarely involve the user groups in their conservation framework. The long-term sustainability of a conservation project can be ensured only with the understanding and daily care of the public and the local community. Since heritage-sensitive urban areas are prone to developmental pressures of conservation and are solely focused on maintaining the area's historic character, the community needs to be involved in the process as they are a part of the setting. The study had tried to develop a methodology that seeks to address communities' aspirations in heritage-sensitive urban areas in order to develop sustainable solutions for conserving heritage. The methodology developed from a case-specific site can be incorporated into any situation. The study revolved around analyzing the context of an existing conservation project and identifying the factors that determine the outcome of an urban heritage conservation project. The factors are then evaluated at the community level to consider the factors influencing the community satisfaction. The methodology also addressed the value the people associate with the historic site to help identify whether the stakeholder being considered can contribute to the planning process or hinder the process. The study can further help in developing a framework through community involvement by addressing the community's needs and developing plans for these conservation areas. Thank you.